when Jungkook coldly mutters, "You deserve it." Taehyung snaps, slamming the door as secrets, betrayals, and years of silent pain explode into the open. "You deserve it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, bitter, sharp, irreversible. And in the next second, the echo of a door being violently slammed rattled the walls. The studio hallway went silent. Even the low hum of a distant speaker seemed to halt in shock. Taehyung's shoulders heaved as he stood behind the closed door, his hands still on the knob, his chest burning with something far more dangerous than rage humiliation. Not because of what Jungkook had said, but because, deep down, he feared it was true. Inside the room, Jungkook didn't move. His jaw clenched, fists curled at his sides, eyes fixed on the now closed door. His breath was shallow, barely audible, but the storm beneath his skin was roaring. There was no satisfaction in what he'd said, only the crumbling weight of what it had broken again. Just minutes ago, the room had been full of tension, but not war. It was just another rehearsal, another evening of strained silence, another moment where their eyes met but their souls didn't. Until Taehyung asked that question, "Do you even care?" That's what started it. That one sentence, and Jungkook, unable to hold it in anymore, had snapped. The truth wasn't just about caring. It was about how caring had become a prison, how their years of unspoken everything had turned affection into chains and memories into knives. How even breathing the same air felt like a reminder of what used to be, of what they never fixed. Taehyung paced the hallway now, his hands trembling, teeth sinking into his lower lip hard enough to draw blood. He wanted to scream. He wanted to go back in there and punch Jungkook in the face. He wanted to cry but wouldn't allow himself that weakness. Not here. Not where anyone could see. The staff had vanished, too polite to interfere, too used to this quiet war. A few hours later, he was gone. No message, no call, just vanished. And the next morning, the headlines were already waiting. Taehyung storms out during rehearsal, Jungkook involved. Wounds not healed? BT's members in tension again. Jungkook saw the notifications. He didn't open them. Instead, he stared at the message Taehyung had sent 4 days ago, the one he never replied to. "Let's talk after rehearsal. I'm tired of pretending we're fine." But they never talked. And now Taehyung was gone. Gone like the letters Jungkook never sent. Gone like the promises that sat buried beneath the weight of stadium lights and perfectly timed smiles. Gone like the version of them that fans still prayed was real. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when they couldn't stop talking, when one would finish the other's sentences, when their laughter was the loudest thing in the room, when fights ended with apologies, not silence, when the look in Taehyung's eyes wasn't guarded, when Jungkook didn't hide behind cold stares. But something changed in 2024, the year everything started unraveling, and no one outside the 7 of them knew the real reason. Not even the fans who saw every post, every live, every red carpet smile. Not even the managers who watched them with weary eyes. Only they knew, and neither had the courage to speak it aloud. The message had been clear that night. "You deserve it." The sentence that shattered them. Jungkook had meant it to hurt. Because he was hurt. Because Taehyung had chosen to go public with someone that Jungkook wasn't ready to face. Not because it was shocking, but because it felt like betrayal in its most personal form. He didn't hate Taehyung. He hated how much Taehyung still meant to him. Even now, that night, Jungkook went live for barely 6 minutes, just enough to show he was fine. Just enough to keep ARMY from worrying. He smiled, played a song, said he was tired, and logged off. But his voice cracked on the last word. Meanwhile, Taehyung posted a photo. A blurry street, drenched in rain. No caption. Just a timestamp 24 a. Jungkook stared at it, and without thinking, liked it, then unliked it, then put his phone face down, staring at the ceiling, the silence of his hotel room pressing down like a weight on his chest. 2 days later, Jimin called. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Pause. Was it about him? Another pause. "I said something I can't take back." "I figured. You always do that when you're scared." Jungkook didn't reply. Jimin knew. He always did. Because months ago, it was Jimin who found Jungkook alone on the rooftop after the concert in Tokyo, knees drawn to his chest, hoodie pulled over his head, headphones in but nothing playing. Just sitting there, replaying memories. "Why don't you just tell him?" Jimin had asked. Jungkook looked up, tears brimming but unshed. Because he doesn't look at me the same anymore. Maybe it was fame, maybe it was timing, maybe it was fear. But something inside them had collapsed long before the door slammed. And now, both were living in the debris. The fans speculated. Some defended, some turned on each other. The media spun stories. Hybe said nothing, and the two men at the center of it all remained silent. Until the award night, they were seated on opposite ends of the row. When the camera panned, they both smiled. But when the lights dimmed, and no one was watching, Jungkook turned his head ever so slightly. Taehyung wasn't looking at him, but he was clenching his jaw. And in his hand was the old bracelet Jungkook had gifted him in 2019. A single thread worn with time but still there. Jungkook didn't smile. He looked away, hands folded tight in his lap, and whispered something under his breath. It wasn't caught on mic, but Jimin, seated in the middle, heard it, and his eyes widened. Because Jungkook had whispered, "I didn't mean it," but it was too late. The dressing room was quiet, lit only by the soft overhead lights and the dim glow of city buildings spilling in through the tall windows. The award show was over. Cheers had died down, the stage lights had cooled, the red carpet had been rolled up. But the tension that lingered in Jungkook's body hadn't dimmed with the evening. He sat on the leather couch, hunched over, his suit slightly wrinkled from hours of performance and public smiles. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again. He didn't check. He didn't have to. He knew who it was from. Jimin had seen the way Jungkook's whisper slipped into the dark. He had caught it like a secret too fragile to touch. And maybe that was why Jimin hadn't said anything the entire night after. He had just placed a hand on Jungkook's back as they exited the stage, and left it there for a second too long. Now, Jungkook stared at the floor, not seeing it. He was still somewhere between the echo of the applause and the silence of that hallway where Taehyung had stormed off. That sound, the slam of the door, it kept replaying, over and over again. And under it all, like a broken loop in his mind, were his own words. "You deserve it." He said it like a blade, and it cut them both. He leaned back, his head against the wall, eyes unfocused. The past was everywhere in the smell of the cologne Taehyung used to borrow from him, still clinging to the corner of his coat, in the faint traces of Taehyung's voice in the rehearsal footage played backstage, in the ache of his chest every time a fan screamed both their names in the same breath. They were still a pair to the world, but inside, they were fractured. The door opened slowly. Jimin stepped in, not saying anything at first. He walked to the mini fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, then tossed it toward Jungkook, who caught it without looking. "You're still thinking about him." Jungkook didn't respond. Jimin sat across from him, elbows on knees, watching him carefully. "You should talk to him." Jungkook finally looked up, jaw tight. "He won't listen. Maybe not. But I saw his face tonight when they announced the winner." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Jungkook scoffed under his breath. Not because he doubted it, but because it hurt too much to believe it. He was holding that bracelet. Jimin continued softly. "The one from Busan." Jungkook closed his eyes. Busan, 2019. The beach was nearly empty that night. Taehyung had been barefoot, pants rolled up, walking just ahead of him as waves lapped at the shore. They were laughing about something he couldn't even remember what anymore. The cold wind had made them cling to each other like gravity. And then, without a word, Jungkook had tied the simple thread bracelet around Taehyung's wrist. "Don't lose this," he had said. "I made it myself." And Taehyung had smiled. "You're so sentimental when no one's looking." Jungkook had shrugged. "Maybe I just don't want you to forget." "I won't." That night had felt like a promise, one of many they never spoke of again. He opened his eyes. "I said it because I was angry," Jungkook finally murmured. "He blindsided me. With her. With that interview. With the way he just acted like it never meant anything." "It did," Jimin cut in. "It does. You both just suck at admitting it." Silence stretched between them. Then Jungkook whispered, "He's slipping away." "No," Jimin said gently. "You're letting him." Jungkook rubbed his face, the weight of months pressing down on him. There were so many things he could have done differently. He should have answered that text, should have knocked on Taehyung's hotel door, should have said something that wasn't meant to hurt, but instead, he had picked silence and pride, and now they sat like thorns in his throat. Outside the window, the sky was still dark, but the faintest line of blue was crawling over the horizon. "He's flying out tomorrow," Jimin said. Jungkook stiffened. "Where?" "Paris. Fashion Week." "Of course." Taehyung never told him. "Not anymore." "You still have tonight," Jimin said. "If you're going to do something, do it before the sun comes up." Jungkook stared at the floor, then slowly stood up. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Jimin nodded once as he passed, and Jungkook slipped out the back exit, his heart thudding in a rhythm that felt dangerously close to regret. Taehyung's hotel was across town. The roads were nearly empty, the silence broken only by the occasional taxi and the flicker of traffic lights. Jungkook sat in the back seat of the car, fingers tapping against his knee, words forming in his mouth and dying before they reached his lips. What would he say? "Sorry? I didn't mean it? Please don't leave?" The car stopped. He stepped out, pulled up his hood, and moved quickly through the lobby. The receptionist recognized him, but said nothing, just nodded politely. He took the elevator to the 12th floor. Room 1204. He hesitated. His fist hovered over the door. But before he could knock, it opened. Taehyung stood there, expression unreadable, dressed in a black hoodie and jeans, suitcase half-zipped behind him. He froze. They stared at each other. Neither spoke. Then Taehyung exhaled a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "What do you want, Jungkook?" Jungkook's throat tightened. "To talk." Taehyung leaned against the doorframe. "Now you want to talk." "I know," Jungkook said, voice low. "I know I should have said something earlier." "You said enough." "No, I said something I didn't mean." Taehyung's eyes were sharp now. "But you said it. You looked me in the eye and said I deserved it. After everything." Jungkook stepped forward. "I was angry." "You think that makes it better?" "No. But it's the truth. I was angry because you made it look so easy to forget. Like none of it mattered." Taehyung's voice trembled. "You think it was easy for me? Every goddamn day I wake up and wonder if we're going to pretend again. If I'll get a message from you, or just a blank stare across the stage. You're the one who pulled away first." Taehyung scoffed. "Because I was scared." That stopped Jungkook. "I was scared," Taehyung repeated. "That if I kept caring this much, it would destroy me. That you'd never say it out loud. That I'd keep waiting for something that was never going to come." I was scared too. They were quiet. The hallway felt too small for all the things they had never said. Then Jungkook stepped closer. "But I never stopped caring." Taehyung's voice dropped. "You have a funny way of showing it." Jungkook's eyes shone, the emotion finally rising to the surface. "Do you still have it?" Taehyung blinked. "What?" "The bracelet." Taehyung hesitated, then slowly raised his wrist. It was there, faded, fraying. Jungkook's chest ached. "I never took it off," Taehyung whispered. In that moment, something in Jungkook shattered. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers over Taehyung's wrist, over the old thread. "I want to fix this," he said. Taehyung didn't pull away. "You can't fix something you keep running from." "I'm not running anymore." They stood there, breaths mingling in the narrow space. Then Taehyung whispered, "Then don't let me walk away again." Jungkook took his hand. "I won't." Outside, the first light of dawn spilled over the city, soft and slow. And for the first time in months, they stood still, together, not as performers, not as idols, just as two people who had once made a promise on a beach and somehow, despite everything, still remembered it. The morning air outside Taehyung's hotel was cold, but it wasn't the kind that bit. It was the kind that lingered gently against the skin like a reminder to breathe slower. The kind that made the city feel a little softer, a little quieter. Inside the hallway, however, the silence between them was louder than the city below. Jungkook's hand was still wrapped around Taehyung's wrist. Not tightly, not like he was trying to keep him there by force, but like he was finally allowing himself to feel something real without the fear of it vanishing again. His thumb rested against the bracelet, the texture familiar beneath his fingers, his heart thudding so hard it echoed in his ears. Taehyung didn't speak. He looked down at their hands, then up at Jungkook's face, searching his eyes for anything he could believe. Jungkook looked tired, not just physically but worn, like someone who had been carrying too much and hadn't realized how much it was hurting him until the moment he stopped moving. And when he spoke, His voice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, honest. I don't want to be this version of us anymore. Taehyung's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. I don't care what it looks like to anyone else. I don't care about the interviews, or the rumors, or the fans asking if we're still close. I care about this, Jungkook continued, gesturing between them. About you, about me, about the thing we used to have that made all of it worth it. There was a tremble in his voice by the end of it, and he didn't bother hiding it. You think you're the only one who's hurting? Taehyung's voice was hoarse, low. You think watching you walk past me like I'm a stranger doesn't kill me a little every time? I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't even try. I was scared that if I did, you'd already moved on. You're not the only one who's scared. They were speaking too close now. Their voices didn't need to rise. They were both on fire from the inside out. Everything they had buried over the last year was surfacing with no filter, no script, no stage. Just pain and truth, and something that still held a heartbeat, even after being crushed by time and silence. I hated seeing you with her, Jungkook admitted, the words dragging out of him like a confession. Not because she was wrong for you, but because for the first time, I realized I never told you what you really meant to me. Taehyung's breath caught. She was never the point, he whispered. She was just a way to distract myself from the hole you left behind. They didn't move. For a moment, they just stared like boys who had grown into men too fast. Like two souls that had danced around each other for too long, always on the edge of something they were too afraid to name. You're not too late, Taehyung said, his voice softer now. But I said it, Jungkook replied, his own voice cracking. That night, I said the one thing I never meant, and it hurt you. Taehyung closed his eyes for a second, like he was trying to breathe through a memory that still stung. Then he opened them again and said, I know you didn't mean it. How? Because you didn't even wait to see if I'd come back. Jungkook's throat tightened. I couldn't. I was ashamed. And now, I'd chase you to Paris if I had to. That pulled the faintest smile from Taehyung, small, almost sad, but real. You wouldn't even last a day without causing a scene. I'd cause 100 if it meant you'd look at me like you used to. There it was again. The ache, the unspoken gravity between them. And this time, when Taehyung stepped forward, it wasn't to argue. It was to lean his forehead against Jungkook's, their breaths mingling, eyes closed. There was nothing romantic about it, not yet. Just raw closeness. Like finding the shore after nearly drowning. I don't know how we get back, Taehyung whispered. But I don't want to walk alone anymore. Jungkook's hand moved up, cradling the side of his face with care that made Taehyung's knees almost buckle. Then don't, he whispered back. Let's find it again. Together. For the first time in months, they weren't fighting. They weren't pretending. They were simply standing still. And that was enough. A few hours later, Taehyung didn't get on the flight to Paris. Hybe was furious, but it didn't matter. Not to him. Not anymore. Instead, he was sitting on a rooftop with Jungkook, hood pulled low, coffee in hand, the early afternoon sun washing them both in gold. They weren't saying much. They didn't need to. There was healing in the silence, too. You remember Busan? Jungkook asked, eyes on the horizon. I never forgot. I kept thinking about the way you laughed that night. How it felt to be there with no cameras, no lights, just us. Taehyung smiled softly. I think I laughed like that because I wasn't scared. What changed? We did. Jungkook nodded. Maybe now's the time we change again. But on purpose. The wind blew gently, ruffling their hair. Jungkook turned to look at Taehyung fully now, studying the curve of his jaw, the softness in his eyes, the quiet pain he still carried, but also the strength, the stubborn beauty of someone who had been through fire and still stood with dignity. I missed you, he said finally. Taehyung looked at him, something fragile and brave in his gaze. I missed me too, he replied. The me that only existed when I was with you. Jungkook exhaled shakily. So what now? We try, Taehyung said. We talk, we fight, we scream if we have to, but we don't shut down. No more doors, no more silences, and no more saying things we don't mean. Especially that. They shared a look. Then Taehyung offered his pinky. Jungkook blinked. Seriously? It worked when we were 19. Jungkook laughed, soft, unguarded, and hooked his pinky with Taehyung's. It was stupid. It was simple. It was everything. By the end of the week, the tabloids were filled with rumors again. Fans had spotted them walking into the same building, smiling, talking. Someone even claimed they saw them in a cafe, sharing headphones, listening to music. No official statement was released. There didn't need to be one. The next time they stood on stage together, it was different. Jungkook's eyes found Taehyung's just before the lights went up. And Taehyung smiled, not the rehearsed kind, not the one reserved for cameras, but the kind that said he was home. And Jungkook smiled back, singing like he finally remembered why he started in the first place. Not for the stage, not for the fame, but for the person beside him, the one who had always deserved more than silence. Under the soft evening sky, the rooftop became a sanctuary for two hearts that had known too much noise. The city below moved in its usual rhythm, cars hummed across bridges, neon signs blinked against dusk, and somewhere in the distance, music floated out of a window. But none of it touched the stillness between them. Jungkook sat cross-legged, hoodie draped over his frame, his hands clasped between his knees. Beside him, Taehyung leaned back on his palms, gaze fixed on nothing in particular, just letting the wind curl around his hair like fingers trying to soothe him. They had spent the last hour in comfortable quiet, broken only by the occasional exchange of small smiles, half-hearted jokes, and fleeting touches that weren't yet intimate but far from accidental. It wasn't like before, but it wasn't broken anymore. "I used to watch you sleep, you know," Jungkook said suddenly, his voice calm but low. Taehyung turned, surprised but not startled. "Back when we used to share rooms on tour, you snored like a dying bear and you'd hog all the blankets. But sometimes, you'd say things in your sleep. Not words, just soft sounds. Like you were talking to someone you missed." Taehyung didn't smile. He just stared, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You once reached out and called my name," Jungkook added, not looking at him now. "And when I asked you about it the next morning, you said you dreamt you were falling off a building, and that I was the only one who caught you." "I remember," Taehyung whispered. "That was the night I realized." "Realized what?" "That I needed you more than I should have." The words sank deep, like ink into water. Jungkook shifted, the wind catching his breath. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did," Taehyung said. "In every way I could. In the way I waited for you after rehearsals. In the way I looked for your face in every crowd. In the way I kept that stupid bracelet even when it snapped twice and I had to tie it back with thread from my own hoodie." Jungkook swallowed. "But words?" Taehyung added. "They felt like traps. I was terrified that if I said something wrong, I'd lose what little of you I had." Jungkook finally met his eyes. "And I was scared that if I admitted how much you meant to me, you'd disappear." "But I did," Taehyung whispered. "No," Jungkook said, voice firmer now. "We both did. Piece by piece. We let everything else, fame, pressure, expectations, cut us into fragments. We kept performing even when we forgot how to be people." The weight of those words settled over them like ash. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Taehyung shifted closer, his shoulder brushing against Jungkook's. "I wanted to tell you I was proud of you," he murmured. "After your solo stage last year, you looked, but whole. I wasn't." "I know," Taehyung said softly. "That's why I cried when I watched the broadcast alone." Jungkook turned his head sharply, caught off guard. "You cried?" "I did," Taehyung said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Because you looked like you were flying, and I wasn't there to catch you if you fell." Jungkook felt the ache settle deep in his chest. Taehyung looked up at the sky, watching as stars began to pierce through the fading light. "I thought about sending you flowers that night, but I didn't know if you'd think it was a peace offering or a goodbye." Jungkook let out a soft breath. It would have felt like both. Silence again. A plane flew overhead, blinking red in the sky. Neither of them moved. Then Jungkook reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled something out. It was small. Simple. A new bracelet almost identical to the one from years ago, but a little sturdier now. Handmade. Unmistakably his. "I made another one," he said, not looking directly at Taehyung. Taehyung stared at it, then at him. "Can I?" Jungkook asked, voice suddenly unsure. Taehyung held out his wrist. Jungkook tied it gently, fingers trembling just a little. When he finished, he didn't let go right away. He kept his hand there, letting the moment settle between them. "Third time's the charm," Taehyung whispered. eyes wet with something unspoken. Jungkook nodded. The night carried on.
They walked the city streets afterward, hoods up, slipping into shadows when needed. Occasionally, someone noticed, whispered, maybe even pointed. But they didn't stop walking, didn't stop talking. They passed the old studio, where they used to spend late nights recording demos and arguing about lyrics. They stopped in front of a ramen shop they hadn't been to in over 2 years. "You used to always steal my egg," Jungkook said. Taehyung smirked, "because you never ate it. You never asked. You never said no." Jungkook laughed. Inside, they sat in the same corner booth they once claimed as theirs. Nothing had changed, not even the faded poster on the wall with their debut photos. It made them both cringe and smile. Taehyung reached across the table, fingers lightly brushing Jungkook. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That night they didn't go home. They wandered Seoul until morning. Park benches, empty sidewalks, late-night convenience stores. Every stop was a memory, and every memory became a step forward. When the sun rose again, they were lying side by side on the grass of Hanggang Park, watching the light spill across the Han River. "Do you think we can be okay?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook turned his head. "We already are." He reached out, his pinky finding Taehyung's. This time, it wasn't just a promise. It was the start of something they should have built a long time ago. And this time, they weren't going to let it break. The sunlight danced across the ripples of the Han River, glinting off the water like 1,000 shattered promises slowly being reassembled into something soft and real. The grass beneath them was damp from morning dew, and the world around them slowly awakened. The distant thrum of joggers passing by, the occasional bike bell, and the fluttering wings of birds weaving patterns in the sky. But neither Jungkook nor Taehyung moved. Their pinkies were still loosely entwined between them. Jungkook turned his head lazily to look at Taehyung, whose eyes were closed, face bathed in morning gold. There was something so peaceful about him in that moment, so unlike the storm that had colored his expressions for the past year. He looked younger, softer, vulnerable in the way he used to be when the world was quieter and their lives hadn't been pulled apart by the gravity of everything they were expected to be. "I used to think we were invincible," Jungkook said, his voice no louder than a breeze. Taehyung cracked one eye open. "We were," he murmured, "until we tried to become who everyone else wanted." Jungkook frowned, eyes back on the river. "Do you ever wish we could go back? To when we were just 2 boys in a dorm who stayed up too late eating instant noodles and talking about the future?" Taehyung smiled, turning to face him. "Yeah, sometimes. But then I remember how much pain we buried under those dreams, how afraid we were to name the things we wanted most. Going back would mean going back to being scared." Jungkook was quiet for a long beat. "I think I've been scared of wanting you for too long." The words were like a thread finally pulled loose. There was no hesitation, no looking away, just truth, raw and trembling on his lips. Taehyung didn't react with surprise. His eyes didn't widen. His body didn't stiffen. He just exhaled, long and slow, as if he had been holding his breath for months waiting to hear it. "I wanted you too," he said. "I think I always did. But there were too many eyes, too many rules, too many reasons not to. But we don't need their permission anymore." "No," Taehyung said, gaze holding Jungkook. "We just need ours." They lay there for a long time until the sun was fully above the skyline and the shadows of their past lives began to fade into the light of a new morning. When they finally sat up, brushing grass from their clothes, there was a softness between them, unspoken but ever-present. It no longer felt fragile. It felt earned. Later that day, Jungkook canceled a meeting. Taehyung skipped a photo shoot. They found themselves back at Jungkook's apartment, where the curtains were still drawn from the last time he'd stayed up too late, restless and unable to sleep. But now, the space didn't feel so heavy. It didn't echo anymore. With Taehyung moving around the kitchen, poking through cabinets and laughing at the lack of actual food, the air felt warmer. "You really survive off protein bars and coffee?" Taehyung asked, waving a half-empty box in the air. Jungkook leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a crooked smile on his face. "It's efficient." Taehyung rolled his eyes. "It's criminal." He tossed the box aside and grabbed his phone. "We're ordering real food." Jungkook didn't argue. He watched instead. Watched the way Taehyung's brows furrowed as he scrolled, the way his lips curled when he found something he liked, the way he hummed to himself like nothing had changed, and maybe that was the beauty of it. That even after everything they could still find themselves here, in this simplicity, in this comfort. When the food arrived, they sat cross-legged on the living room floor, boxes spread out like a picnic. They didn't talk about the past, not directly, but every word, every laugh, every stolen glance carried the weight of memories that no longer hurt as much. They were becoming softer around the edges, like old photographs in the sun. After lunch, they ended up on the couch, half watching a movie, half dozing off. Jungkook's head dipped toward Taehyung's shoulder, heavy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from letting go. Taehyung didn't shift away. He leaned in. "I used to imagine this," Jungkook mumbled. Taehyung glanced at him. This you hear like this, without all the noise." Taehyung looked down at their hands, Jungkook's fingers resting loosely against his thigh. "I used to imagine you looking at me without regret," Taehyung said softly. Jungkook lifted his head, eyes dark and unguarded. "Do you see it now?" Taehyung nodded. "I do." They didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't about that. It was about proximity, about letting silence speak without fear, about the spaces between them no longer needing to be filled with performance. Night fell again, slow and unhurried. The city shimmered beyond the windows. Jungkook walked Taehyung to the door, not wanting to but knowing the world was already trying to pull them back into its orbit. Schedules, deadlines, cameras. "You'll call?" Taehyung asked. "Every night," Jungkook promised. "And you'll show up?" "Always." Taehyung stared at him for a long second, then reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Jungkook's ear. "Then maybe we'll be okay." Jungkook caught his hand, held it for a heartbeat too long. "We already are." Taehyung smiled, soft and sure, and stepped into the hallway. For the first time in over a year, the door didn't slam. The days that followed weren't perfect. There were still awkward pauses during group rehearsals, still sideways glances from staff who had noticed the sudden shift in energy between them. But the air was lighter. Their jokes were more frequent. The tension that once curled like smoke behind every word began to dissolve. One night, after a performance, Jungkook found Taehyung waiting by the van instead of going straight to his own. "You okay?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung didn't answer. He simply reached out, laced their fingers together for just a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for Jungkook to feel it. They rode back together in silence, but that silence was full of something sacred. And then 2 weeks later it happened. It wasn't planned. There were no fireworks, no slow-motion moment. They were in a quiet backstage room, the rest of the members elsewhere, the night still buzzing in their ears from a successful encore. Jungkook was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, sweat clinging to his neck. Taehyung stood above him, towel slung around his shoulders, expression unreadable. "Come here," Jungkook said, voice hoarse. Taehyung didn't move. So Jungkook stood. And then, like the most natural thing in the world, they closed the space between them. Taehyung touched Jungkook's jaw, thumb brushing his cheekbone. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more." And then their lips met, soft, slow, trembling with the weight of everything they'd buried and the freedom of finally letting go. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence had finally become a place where love could grow. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jungkook wasn't afraid of falling. Because this time, Taehyung wasn't walking away. He was waiting. He was staying. The room was still humming with silence when they broke apart. Taehyung's forehead rested gently against Jungkook, their breaths sinking in an invisible rhythm. Like a private language only the two of them had ever known. The quiet was not heavy, it was sacred. Not a silence that asked to be broken, but one that existed to cradle something fragile and real. For the first time in too long, neither of them flinched. Jungkook blinked, lashes brushing softly against Taehyung's cheek. "Did we just?" Taehyung's lips curved faintly, his voice a whisper barely carried through the stillness. "Yeah, we did." A beat passed, then Jungkook laughed under his breath, quiet, breathless, disbelieving. And Taehyung smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling like they used to when life was simpler, and the nights longer and the love between them hadn't yet been buried beneath duty, pressure, or silence. Jungkook pulled back just enough to look at him, really look. His eyes searched Taehyung's face as if trying to memorize every line, every flicker of emotion, every silent echo that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. There was no fear there now, no doubt. Just the raw, open truth of a heart finally freed. "Why did we wait so long?" Jungkook asked, not accusing, not bitter, just aching. Taehyung reached up, brushing his fingers through Jungkook's damp hair, thumb grazing over his temple. "Because we didn't know we were allowed to want this." Jungkook closed his eyes at the softness in Taehyung's voice, at the familiar scent of his skin, sweat and cologne and something unmistakably him. "But we always did." Taehyung nodded, his voice dipping into something deeper. "Always." The dressing room door clicked open suddenly, and they broke apart instinctively, stepping back as though they hadn't just changed the entire trajectory of their lives in a single kiss. It was Namjoon, earbuds in, barely glancing their way before muttering something about the car waiting outside. Then he was gone again. But the shift had already happened. They looked at each other, breath caught somewhere in the middle of what could have been panic or laughter. Jungkook's lips were still tingling, and Taehyung's heart hadn't stopped its frantic rhythm since the moment they touched. "Come with me tonight," Taehyung said, suddenly, urgently. "Let's not go home yet." "Where?" Jungkook asked, already reaching for his bag. "Anywhere no one will find us." By midnight, they were far outside the city, Taehyung behind the wheel of his old black car that still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and pine-scented air freshener. The windows were down, the air biting but welcome, rushing into their lungs like freedom. The road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by nothing but trees and the glitter of distant towns. They said nothing for the first half hour. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was a warm blanket, a heartbeat, a trusted companion. Jungkook leaned his head against the window, watching the stars blur into lines. "Do you remember the night we got lost in Gangwon?" Taehyung chuckled. "You dropped the map in the river. You dared me to grab a fish with my bare hands. You tried. I screamed when it flopped near me." Taehyung laughed again, louder this time. "You screamed like you were being murdered. And you laughed until you fell into the water. I thought we'd freeze to death that night." "But we didn't," Jungkook whispered, voice growing soft. "We just held each other and waited for sunrise." Taehyung's hands tightened on the wheel. "It was the first time I realized I didn't want to wake up next to anyone else." They pulled off the highway soon after, into a quiet clearing near the sea. One of the secret places they used to escape to during the early years when everything became too loud, and they needed to remember who they were beneath the spotlight. Now, under a sky smeared with constellations and the sound of waves crashing against dark sand, they stepped out and stood side by side. No cameras, no stage, just wind and salt in them. Jungkook's hand brushed against Taehyung's. And this time, Taehyung didn't hesitate. He laced their fingers together and held on. They didn't speak for a while. They walked along the beach, letting the ocean soak their shoes, letting the sky witness the quiet rediscovery of something they'd buried but never lost. Every step was a stitch mending what had once been torn. Taehyung stopped first, pulling Jungkook toward a patch of sand where they could sit, knees touching, shoulders leaning. "I used to talk to the stars about you," Taehyung said, "like an idiot." Jungkook tilted his head. "What did you say?" "That I hated how much I missed you. That I wanted you to read my mind because I was too much of a coward to say what I felt. That maybe if I kept singing with you long enough, you'd eventually hear me without words." Jungkook's throat tightened. "I think I did, I just didn't know what I was hearing." "And now?" Jungkook reached over, cupping the side of Taehyung's neck gently. "Now I hear everything." They kissed again, not rushed, not stolen. It was quiet, like prayer, like forgiveness, like everything in the world had paused just long enough for them to finally get it right. And when they pulled apart, their foreheads pressed together once more, Taehyung whispered, "I'm scared again." Jungkook didn't pull away. "Me too." "But I want to be scared with you," Taehyung added, "not without you." Jungkook nodded, heart aching. "Then let's be scared together, brave too." The moon dipped lower behind the sea, and the first light of dawn began to shimmer along the horizon once more. This time, they didn't need to chase it. It came to them. They spent that night curled together on the sand, arms wrapped tight, words whispered into skin and collarbones and wind. Promises not spoken aloud but sealed with the rhythm of their breathing, the rise and fall of two hearts sinking once more. The world would ask questions. The cameras would return. The rumors would spiral. But here, in this moment, they were only Jungkook and Taehyung. Two boys who had survived the storm. Two men who had found their way home. The ocean breeze was gentler now, like it had been softened by the confessions whispered between them, by the quiet exhale of a weight too long carried. Taehyung stirred first, his body slowly waking as the sky began to blush pink behind the waves. His fingers instinctively tightened around Jungkook's shirt, and for a moment he didn't open his eyes, didn't want to. He just breathed in the warmth of the body curled beside his, the comforting rise and fall of Jungkook's chest against his own, and the faint scent of skin, sea, and something that could only be described as home. Jungkook's lashes fluttered, and without opening his eyes he murmured, "You're still here." Taehyung's smile was soft against his shoulder. "I didn't say I was going anywhere." "Good," Jungkook replied, voice husky with sleep. "Because if you did, I'd have to chase you again." Taehyung finally opened his eyes, blinking into the early morning light. Jungkook looked different in this hour, softer, younger, like the boy who used to sneak snacks into dorm rooms and write lyrics in the dark when he couldn't sleep. But there was a gravity to him now too, a steadiness Taehyung hadn't seen in a long time. A man who knew what he wanted and, more importantly, was ready to hold it without fear. They sat up slowly, brushing sand from their clothes and watching the ocean in silence. The waves lapped at the shore with a rhythm that felt almost like a song, and Taehyung reached out, running his fingers along the line of Jungkook's wrist before linking their hands again. Jungkook glanced sideways. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "That depends," Taehyung said, a glint in his eye. "Are you thinking we should call Jimin and ask if he'll cover for us again?" Jungkook snorted. "I was thinking maybe we don't go back yet, not today." Taehyung tilted his head, amused. "We'll get in trouble." Jungkook looked out at the sea. "Let them be angry. For once, I just want to exist without apologizing for what makes me feel alive." Taehyung's smile faded into something more serious, something tender. He nodded slowly, brushing a stray hair from Jungkook's face. "Then let's disappear for a while." And so they did. They spent the day driving without a destination, letting the road decide for them. They stopped at a small coastal diner that smelled like fried shrimp and nostalgia. The waitress didn't recognize them, or if she did, she said nothing, just brought them pancakes and miso soup and left them to their silence. Jungkook kept stealing bites from Taehyung's plate, and Taehyung didn't complain. He just watched him with a kind of awe, like he was seeing something he thought he'd lost forever and couldn't believe it was still here. In the afternoon, they found an old bookstore nestled between a flower shop and a forgotten arcade. Jungkook wandered into the poetry section and pulled out a book with a worn navy cover. He flipped it open and read quietly, lips moving, then passed it to Taehyung without a word. Taehyung read the same line 3 times before looking up. "You are my favorite place I've never been." He looked at Jungkook, something catching in his throat. Jungkook smiled, "Too cheesy." Taehyung shook his head, "No, just right." They bought the book. By sunset, they were lying in a meadow behind the bookstore, the sky above them burning orange and gold. Jungkook rested his head on Taehyung's chest, fingers toying with the hem of his shirt. "I keep thinking someone's going to pull this away from me," Jungkook whispered. "Like I'm dreaming, like I'll wake up and you'll be gone again." Taehyung ran a hand through his hair. "Then I'll keep reminding you that you're not asleep. And if I forget again, I'll kiss you until you remember." Jungkook laughed, the sound pure and unburdened. That might actually work. Night crept in again, and with it came the reluctant awareness that their time hidden from the world was running out. Taehyung sat on the hood of the car, legs pulled up, staring at the stars. Jungkook leaned beside him, arms folded, eyes tracing constellations. "Do you think we'll have to hide this?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. "I think we've always been hiding, even when we didn't mean to, even when we were just standing too close or looking too long." Taehyung's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of hiding," Jungkook added, "but I'm more tired of losing you." Taehyung turned, expression unreadable. "So what do we do?" "We tell the people who matter," Jungkook said. "We don't make a statement, we don't need to perform this, we just live it, quietly, truthfully. And if the world finds out?" Jungkook looked at him then, really looked, then let them. The drive back to Seoul was quieter, but not in the way it used to be. It wasn't tense. It wasn't hollow. It was filled with small touches, hands brushing in the dark, eyes meeting in the mirror. The kind of silence that only comes when words are no longer needed. When they returned, the city felt different, not because it had changed, but because they had. It no longer towered over them like something to fear. It was just a backdrop now, a stage they no longer owed everything to. Jimin was waiting at Jungkook's apartment, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a knowing look on his face. "Took you long enough," he said, sipping from a mug. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "We needed time." Jimin nodded, and Jungkook glanced at Taehyung, who had already sat down beside Jimin and stolen the mug from his hand. "And we're okay now," Taehyung said, taking a sip. Jimin smiled. "Good. Maybe now you two can stop looking like abandoned puppies every time you're in the same room." "We didn't look like that," Jungkook said. Jimin raised a brow. "You did." Taehyung threw a cushion at him. For the next few weeks, life fell back into rhythm, but with subtle changes. Jungkook and Taehyung stopped flinching when their fingers brushed during interviews. They stopped avoiding each other's gaze on stage. There were new songs being written now, songs that didn't bleed with sadness or fear, but with longing finally met. HYBE eventually called them in. There were questions, warnings, a long talk about image and public perception. Jungkook listened quietly. Then he said, "We're not asking for permission. We're just letting you know we're done lying." Taehyung placed a hand on his knee beneath the table, grounding him. They left the room without waiting for approval. Later that night, Jungkook posted a photo, just the sea, a soft sunset, and a caption that read, "Some things are worth finding your way back to." Taehyung reposted it an hour later with a single line, "Home isn't a place." Armies noticed. They always did. The hashtags trended for 3 days. But no one could say for certain what it meant. And neither of them clarified. They didn't need to. Because for the first time in their lives, their love wasn't a performance. It was quiet, steady, real. And this time they were going to protect it, not from the world but from themselves, from the fear, from the silence, from the weight of pretending. They'd lost each other once. They weren't going to do it again. There was something different in the way they moved now. It wasn't obvious to everyone but to those who had watched them for years, those who'd studied every glance, every hesitant touch, every note in their voices when they sang near each other. It was undeniable. It was in the way Taehyung looked at Jungkook when he laughed, as if committing the sound to memory. It was in the way Jungkook stood just a little closer now, no longer tethered by invisible boundaries. Their moments were still quiet, but they had stopped hiding them from themselves. Late one night, a week after that storm of hashtags had come and gone, Jungkook found himself alone in the dance studio. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, and the faint echo of his own footsteps filled the space between beats of the track playing on repeat. He wasn't dancing for content, or for rehearsal, or for performance. He was dancing because his heart ached in that beautiful, full kind of way, too much to keep still. The door opened behind him without a sound, but he felt the shift in the room the second Taehyung stepped inside. Jungkook didn't stop. He didn't turn. He just kept moving, body twisting through each motion like a story only he could tell, but Taehyung already understood. When the song faded and the silence returned, Jungkook's chest was rising and falling with soft, measured breaths. Sweat clung to his skin. His arms dropped to his sides. "I've been watching for 10 minutes, Taehyung said, his voice barely louder than the quiet. Jungkook turned, lips curling faintly. "I didn't hear you." Taehyung stepped into the room fully, his eyes tracing the lines of Jungkook's frame, lingering where light-kissed collarbones and damp curls clung to his forehead. "You were somewhere else." Jungkook nodded. "I was remembering." "Anything good?" Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. "You." The air shifted again. Taehyung crossed the room slowly, hands tucked into the sleeves of his oversized cardigan. He didn't speak until he stood directly in front of Jungkook, looking up at him with that quiet intensity that had always unraveled Jungkook from the inside. "You used to be so careful," Taehyung said, "so scared of saying too much." "I still am," Jungkook admitted, "but you make me brave." There was a pause, the kind that meant everything, and then Taehyung leaned forward and kissed him, gently, unhurried. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded answers. It was the kind that said, "I'm here. I'm listening. I feel it too." When they pulled apart, Jungkook rested his forehead against Taehyung's. "How long do you think we can live like this?" Taehyung's thumb brushed his jaw. "As long as we keep choosing it, every day, even when it's hard." They left the studio together, hands brushing, hearts full. The city was asleep around them, but they were awake in every way that mattered. It became a routine, nights at each other's apartments, mornings spent tangled in silence and warmth, messages exchanged between rehearsals, some coded, some not. Taehyung would send photos of dogs he passed on walks, captioned with, "He looks like you when you're hungry." Jungkook would reply with selfies mid-gym session, captioned, "This is me preparing to carry all your emotional baggage." And when it rained, Taehyung would show up at Jungkook's door without a word, just drenched and tired and needing to be held. Jungkook never asked. He just wrapped him in towels and arms and stayed close until the storm passed, both inside and out. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt. Times when cameras followed too closely, when fans speculated too loudly, when one of them flinched out of instinct and the other took a step back, just in case. But they always found their way back. One evening, after a shoot had run late and the city lights painted the windows gold, Jungkook sat on the floor of his apartment, legs stretched out, his head resting in Taehyung's lap. They weren't speaking, just letting the quiet settle between them like an old friend. Taehyung ran fingers through Jungkook's hair, then asked, "Do you think you'll ever tell them?" Jungkook's eyes remained on the ceiling. Them who? The world. Jungkook was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Maybe not everything, but maybe one day I'll stop pretending in front of the people who matter." Taehyung nodded. "I'd like that." Jungkook turned, looking up at him. "Do you want to?" Taehyung smiled. "I want you, the rest we'll figure out." The moment passed, soft and steady. But the next day it happened. A fan account posted a photo, blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. Two figures holding hands near the Han River, one in a beanie, the other in a mask. The angle was far, but the height, the walk, the familiarity was too precise to deny. The fandom exploded. Some defended, some accused, some mourned. Jungkook stared at his phone screen for a long time after seeing it, fingers frozen mid-scroll. Then Taehyung texted, "Still choosing us?" Jungkook replied instantly. Every single second. They didn't issue statements. They didn't delete the post. They didn't flinch. Instead, that weekend, Jungkook posted a video. No sound, no filter. Just a shot of the sky turning from dusk to night, and at the end, two hands reaching into frame and intertwining slowly, gently. The caption read, "Some things don't need to be shouted to be real." It broke the internet. But more importantly, it made Taehyung cry. Jungkook held him on the balcony that night, fingers stroking his back as tears soaked into his hoodie. "I didn't think we'd get here," Taehyung whispered. "Me neither," Jungkook replied, "but I never stopped hopping. I love you." Jungkook didn't breathe for a moment. Then he whispered, "Say it again." Taehyung looked up, tears glistening in the city lights. "I love you." Jungkook smiled, hands cradling his face like he was something sacred. "Then don't ever stop." They kissed beneath the moonlight, not as idols, not as headlines, but as two souls who had crossed every impossible line just to reach each other. And this time they weren't letting go. The city lay beneath them, its lights flickering like 1,000 secrets spoken too softly to be caught by the noise. From the balcony of Jungkook's apartment, everything felt still, safe, as though the world, usually spinning so violently with schedules, expectations, and flashing lights, had paused for them just this once to make room for something too important to be rushed. Jungkook leaned against the glass railing, Taehyung pressed close at his side. The air was crisp, not cold, but sharp enough to make them both aware of how much warmer they felt beside each other. Neither of them said anything for a while. Words, for the first time in a long time, felt too small. But love didn't need explaining. It had already lived between them in every stolen glance, every unsent message, every song lyric left unfinished because it hurt too much to say it out loud. Now finally it was here, spoken and heard, real, undeniable. Jungkook tilted his head back and closed his eyes, letting the wind graze his skin like a second confession. The city was alive with stories, but tonight, theirs was the only one that mattered. Taehyung shifted beside him, his hand sliding into Jungkook's back pocket in that casual, familiar way that made Jungkook smile, even before he opened his eyes again. "You always do that," Jungkook said quietly, his voice tinged with amusement. "Do what?" "That thing with your hand." Taehyung smirked, pressing his nose to Jungkook's shoulder. "I like knowing you're here, solid, real." Jungkook turned, arms coming around Taehyung's waist, resting his chin on his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." "I used to be afraid you would," Taehyung admitted, the words barely audible above the wind. "Not because you wanted to, but because the world would find a way to take you." "They tried," Jungkook said, "but I kept walking back to you." Taehyung looked down at him, brushing strands of hair from Jungkook's eyes. "You always did." The soft light from the apartment bathed them in gold, wrapping their shadows together on the balcony wall. Inside, their phones lay forgotten, screens dim, notifications piling. Somewhere, the internet boiled with speculation, hashtags spiraled into trends, and theories bloomed like wildfire. But none of it could reach them now. They spent the night without barriers. Jungkook cooked while Taehyung sat on the counter, legs swinging idly, narrating fake cooking show commentary in a husky announcer voice. Every now and then, Jungkook would try to be serious, only to break into laughter when Taehyung leaned in dramatically, whispering, "Chef, I think the noodles are emotionally unstable." They ate on the floor, knees brushing, chopsticks tapping against bowls between slow conversation and quiet glances. Afterwards, Taehyung picked up his guitar and strummed lazily, not aiming for perfection, just letting the notes stretch between them. Jungkook sang along, humming at first, then letting lyrics emerge in soft threads. It wasn't a song they'd ever recorded, it wasn't even finished, but it was theirs. And that was enough. When sleep came, it was on the couch, legs tangled, bodies heavy with the kind of exhaustion that only came after long-held tension was finally released. Jungkook's head rested in the curve of Taehyung's neck, Taehyung's arm a protective band around his waist. Neither of them dreamed. They didn't need to. Morning broke slow and golden, the sun filtering through sheer curtains like silk. Jungkook woke first, blinking blearily, eyes adjusting to the quiet light. He didn't move, not wanting to disturb the rise and fall of Taehyung's chest against his. His hand found Taehyung's and held it gently, tracing the knuckles with his thumb. Taehyung stirred moments later, breath warm against Jungkook's jaw. "You're starring." "I'm memorizing," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung smiled without opening his eyes. "Take your time." The day unfolded quietly. No rehearsals, no meetings, just the rare gift of stillness. But stillness didn't mean silence. Later, sitting on the floor with their backs against the couch, Taehyung asked the question that had been waiting since the photo leaked. "What happens if they try to take this from us?" Jungkook didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They can't, not unless we let them." Taehyung's gaze lingered, but the company. "They don't own my heart," Jungkook said, eyes steady. "They can manage the music, the shows, the brand, but this," he reached out, placing a hand over Taehyung's chest, "this is mine." Taehyung's throat bobbed. "And I'm not giving it up this time," Jungkook whispered, "not for anything." Taehyung leaned forward, pressing their foreheads together. "Then let them try." The weeks that followed weren't easy. Questions came, sometimes from the press, more often from people closer. Managers, coordinators, even fellow members who noticed the shift and said nothing but wore concern in their eyes. Namjoon pulled Jungkook aside after a rehearsal one night. "I won't ask for details," he said, "but just make sure this, whatever it is, isn't built on borrowed time." "It's not borrowed," Jungkook said, "it's reclaimed." Namjoon nodded slowly, "Then hold it tight." Jin, ever the blunt one, cornered Taehyung in the break room. "Are you in love?" Taehyung blinked. "What?" "Don't play dumb, I see it in your face, I've seen it in his too." Taehyung hesitated, then said softly, "I think I always was." Jin offered him a bottle of water and a soft pat on the back. "Good. Just don't let the industry convince you that love has to be a secret." It wasn't a secret anymore, not really. They didn't announce it, but they didn't hide it. When they arrived together, they stayed together. When they sat in interviews, their knees sometimes touched. When they sang duets on stage, they stopped glancing away. And when one of them looked tired, the other was always just behind, shoulders brushing, hands steadying. The fandom shifted too. There were skeptics, there was noise. But there was also something else. Love. Messages poured in, tweets, letters, quiet support. People who said, "I don't care what it is, I just love seeing them happy again." And that was enough. Late one night, long after another stage performance, Taehyung stood in the dressing room staring at his own reflection. His tie hung loose, makeup faded. Jungkook appeared behind him, sliding an arm around his waist and resting his chin on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung met his eyes in the mirror. "That maybe we really made it." "We did," Jungkook said, "because we didn't give up." Taehyung turned slowly, wrapping his arms around him. "I don't want to keep counting anniversaries of the day we broke. I want to start counting the ones where we chose each other." Jungkook kissed the corner of his mouth, "Then let today be the first." And it was. Not because of a grand gesture. Not because of a press release. But because when they went home that night and curled into each other's arms, there was no more hiding, no more pretending, no more fear. Only two people who had been lost in a storm of fame, expectation, and silence, who had finally found each other again. And this time, they were ready to stay.